Hello, my name is Dr. Nancy Lin. I'm a medical oncologist at Dana-Farber Cancer Institute in Boston, Massachusetts, and I'm excited to tell you a little bit today about the ELECTRA clinical trial. So first of all, why is this study important? So for people who have estrogen receptor positive, HER2 negative metastatic breast cancer, about 15% of people will eventually develop cancer spread to the brain, and we call that brain metastases. Now, there are effective options for patients who have cancer that has spread to the brain, and they can include radiation and, in some cases, surgery. And sometimes we do give other treatments for this. But what is important to recognize is that there are no systemic treatments, that is, that there are no oral or IV treatments that are approved by the FDA for the purpose of treating patients who have active cancer in the brain from this type of breast cancer. And so more effective treatment options are needed. This trial uses two medications. The first medication is called Elacestrant, and the second is called Abemaciclib. So what is Elacestrant? So Elacestrant is an oral pill, and what it does is it causes the estrogen receptor, which sits inside breast cancer cells, to be destroyed. Why is this important? It's important because many estrogen receptor positive breast cancers depend on signaling through the estrogen receptor in order to grow and survive. And there has been a phase 3 clinical trial, which is called the Emerald trial, where elacestrant on its own was compared to other regular hormonal therapies also on their own in people with estrogen receptor positive metastatic breast cancer whose disease had already worsened on a previous hormonal treatment. And the trial showed that patients who received elacestrant did better than patients who received conventional hormonal therapy. What's important is the trial did not include patients who had active cancer in the brain, but at the same time, we know that elacestrant crosses the blood-brain barrier very well. So then what is abemaciclib? Abemaciclib, otherwise known as Verzenio, is a type of medicine called a CDK4/6 inhibitor. And what these medicines do is they prevent cells from dividing or multiplying because they block the cell from going from what's called G1 to S. And if you remember from high school biology, going through this so-called cell cycle is how cells are able to replicate themselves. So by giving abemaciclib, you prevent cancer cells from multiplying. And what has been shown in many phase 3 trials is that abemaciclib improves the effectiveness of hormonal therapy. Now, one of the important questions that was recently answered was, well, what if you've already had a previous CDK inhibitor? So what if somebody has already had ribociclib, otherwise known as Kisqali, or palbociclib, otherwise known as Ibrance? And it turns out that abemaciclib still works in this situation. And this is based on a phase 3 clinical trial called Post-Monarch, where combining hormonal therapy with abemaciclib, patients did better than if they just got the hormonal therapy on its own. And then importantly, abemaciclib has also been shown to cross the blood-brain barrier. So why is this study being done? So elacestrant is an oral medication approved by the FDA for the treatment of people with estrogen receptor positive metastatic breast cancer. And abemaciclib is an oral medication also approved by the FDA for treatment of people with ER positive metastatic breast cancer. And we know that both of these compounds cross the blood-brain barrier. So the study is testing the safety and effectiveness of combining these two medications in patients who have estrogen receptor positive breast cancer that has spread to the brain. This is the way the study is designed. There is a first part of the study, which is the phase 1b, that was looking at different doses of elacestrant and abemaciclib to figure out what is the best combination of doses to use. And then phase 2 is looking at the combination that's decided upon in the phase 1, but specifically looking at the activity of the combination in people whose cancer has spread to the brain. At this point in time, the phase 1b part of the study has been completed, and so we're now enrolling into the phase 2 part of the study. What did we learn from the phase 1 part of the study? Well, what we learned is that among 23 patients who were treated, that we were able to combine both drugs at full dose. Importantly, in this phase 1b experience, everyone on the trial had already received a previous CDK4 inhibitor, such as palbociclib or ribociclib, and all patients had received at least one previous chemotherapy. And despite this, about a quarter of patients had tumor shrinkage with the combination. At 16 weeks, 70% of patients had stable disease in their body or better. The side effects were the side effects that we would expect from either drug on their own. And there was a recommended phase 2 dose that was determined. Importantly, patients in the phase 1b, for the most part, did not have cancer in the brain. So what else do we know about the combination? And so recently we saw the results of this phase 2 trial called ELEVATE, again, not including patients with cancer in the brain, where we saw that the average length of time that patients had their disease under control was over a year, and that we saw, again, about 25% of people having tumor shrinkage. So right now, the ELECTRA trial is enrolling patients, and this specific part of the trial is to really understand what happens to patients who have cancer in the brain who are treated with this two-drug oral combination. Importantly, in this study, there's no placebo group and there's no randomization. So if one is eligible for the study and enrolls, then the patient will receive both Elacestrant and Abemaciclib. Both of the drugs are supplied by the study. In order to participate in this study, patients do have to be seen at one of the study sites for their oncology visits, safety checks, and scans. And patients can stay on the study so long as that they are receiving clinical benefit without too many side effects. This is a very busy slide, but just to show some of the criteria in order to be able to go onto the trial. And I'll just point out for this part of the trial, which is phase 2, people do have to have cancer that is in the brain, and it has to be measurable. And then in terms of the prior treatments, at least one previous hormonal therapy, up to 2 previous chemotherapies, and up to 2 previous CDK inhibitors, but no previous Abemaciclib. How do you find out more about this study? If you're interested in learning more, if you look under the clinicaltrials.gov ID that is shown with the arrow, if you just put that number into your web search, you should be able to pull up this record. And then what is important is if you want to look at which study location is closest to you, there are 84 locations that are open. You can click on the contacts and locations, and it will show all of the locations that are open along with the principal investigator for that location. There's also an interactive map that's available through this website to find the closest study site near you. So thank you for your attention, and I'm really delighted to be able to tell you a little bit more about this study.